morning, everybody. Let us go ahead and find our seats. And welcome to our very final General Assembly for the semester. We're right here. We're looking for a strong finish, as we were encouraged in chapel earlier this week. Now, I don't know if you read the My Maranatha announcement and saw just a little bit of irony that here we are talking about global warming in our coldest week of the semester. And just to take a little straw poll, how many of you would be totally fine with just a little global warming right now in Watertown? I think you would. If you really want that, take Christmas break in Florida. All right, we are excited today to have Mr. Stephen Einhorn as our speaker, and also his wife Nancy, who is here with us. Stephen lives in Milwaukee. He is a graduate from Cornell with a major in chemistry and received a master's in polymeric materials from Brooklyn Polytechnic Institute. He also attended Wharton Graduate School. After his studies, he spent 10 years working in a family paint manufacturing business as a chemist and general manager. For 30 years, he led a merger and acquisitions firm specializing in chemical transactions and participated in the sale of about 200 companies, which is about 200 more than I have participated in. 20 years ago, he founded the venture fund called Capital Midwest Fund, which focuses on technology and with advanced software for business-to-business application, and is now his senior advisor. Mr. Einhorn is the published author of two very different books. One of the books is a book of jokes and reflections on business life, and one is a book on global warming. And I'm pretty sure we're going to hear about the global warming one today, but I guess if I'm wrong, the joke's on us. His book, Climate Change, What They Rarely Teach in College, was at one point the #1 selling weather book on Amazon. Why is this an important topic for us? Well, as believers, we should be very interested in the creation that God has given to us and how he expects us to care and to tend for that. After all, he created man and put him in the garden to tend it. But in order to do that, we have to have as our concern, how do we think about? What is it that we need to know that'll help us respond correctly? The fact is there's agendas, there's philosophies, and there's worldviews out there that can cause confusion. In fact, today is the opening day of the UN Summit on Climate Change in Dubai. Now, is it a coincidence that we scheduled this assembly to coincide with that climate summit beginning? Yes, actually it was. It just so happened that way. But we have to be careful in how we discern the truth so that we can think correctly and ultimately respond rightly. And I think Mr. Einhorn is going to help push us towards that in his presentation. At the end of the presentation, he is going to remain up here. If you have a question and want to come discuss some things, he is available. He also told me that he has brought some books of his, some copies that he wants to give out, provided that you promise to read it. There will be a test. I don't know if there's a test on it, but there will be a test, I'm sure. So, let us stand, let us pray, and then we will welcome Mr. Einhorn to the stage. Our Father, we thank you so much for this day you've given to us and the beautiful weather we do have. We thank you for this man who's here to challenge us. We pray that you give him ease of speaking. Help him to communicate well. Help us to be receptive and discerning. And Lord, in the end, we just pray that you would be glorified in all things. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. You may be seated. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Stephen Einhorn.
Good music. Thank you. This is to make sure you listen to me. I've been looking forward to being here for a long time. And now I'm here, looking forward to speaking with you. I've written this book, as you can see, on climate change. And I understand that a few of you have read my book. Is that true? Could you raise your hand if you read my book? Well, we have one. Well, you don't have to listen. But everyone else, you guys have to listen. And I have a question for you first. How many of you believe that climate change is an important problem? Global warming is an important problem. Just raise your hands if you believe it. Okay. So not many, but a few of you actually believe this, which is fine. So let's just talk about it for a little bit. This is the entire argument of the climate alarmists. You have fossil fuels and you burn them. And when you burn fossil fuels, you generate atmospheric carbon dioxide. And we have about 100 parts per million more carbon dioxide than we had 50 years ago. And that in turn causes global warming. And the global warming is what causes the climate change. So I wanted to start with this because this is their entire argument. If any part of this breaks, their argument falters. So let's see what happens. We'll start out with hurricanes. There haven't been any increase in hurricanes for 50 years. This is from the NOAA. That's the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. It's part of the US government. You're paying taxes to get this. Okay. So you see these squiggly lines going across. There's been no increase. There's been no increase in 50 years in hurricanes. But you can see this little line that goes from the bottom left all the way up to the upper right. Is that right? Right, left. Okay, anyway. In any case, it's going up. That is carbon dioxide. And almost every year, carbon dioxide increases. The point is, and you can see, that there is no connection between carbon dioxide and hurricanes. But how many times have you read in the paper, oh, Hurricane Ida is an example of climate change? Well, there's no connection between hurricanes and carbon dioxide increase. So let's look at tornadoes. It's the same thing. This is 75 years in the same group, the same government group, your government. You can see there is no increase in tornadoes. But there is an increase every year in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Good, let's switch to acres, burned, fires. You've heard many times there's so many more fires now, it's just terrible. But actually there are fewer fires now. And not only are there fewer fires, but there are fewer acres that burn. And this is also from the government, the National Interagency Fire Center. Now, here's another reason not to be concerned. You know this guy, smoking, right? Only you can prevent forest fires. This guy's been talking since before I was born. And he's right, because 80% of all forest fires, they're human-based. We do it by accident, we do it by arson or utility bills, wires or whatever. So there's only a small percentage that altogether is generated by anything else. There's no reason to concentrate on carbon dioxide. And finally, here's droughts. This is droughts. You can see that's the orange toward the bottom. You can see there's no increase in droughts over the past many years. None at all. Okay, so what have you just seen? You've seen proof by your US government that there are no more hurricanes, no more tornadoes, no more forest fires, no more acres of forest fires, no more droughts than there were 50 or 100 years ago. But every year almost, there's more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So think about it. So now I have a question for you. Do you know what the warmest year was during your lifetime? Anybody? Just raise your hand if you know. Nobody knows. Now, we just talked about climate change. A lot of people, millions and millions of people, they think that climate change is really important. And they think that global warming is really important. But they have no idea when the warmest year was in their lifetime. Now, why is that? Maybe someone doesn't want you to know that. Could that be the reason? In any case, this is what's happened over the past several years. And the answer to the question is 2016. So memorize that. It's important. 2016 was the warmest year in your lifetime. Okay? But what does that mean? That means the last 6 years have been cooler, right? So how much should we worry about global warming? Really? What are we worried about? It's cooler now. Not a lot cooler. We're talking about a fraction of a degree. But this is over a whole year around the entire Earth. So, what happened before that? This is kind of important. The warmest year before 2016 was 1998. And look what happened. The next 16 years were cooler. Really? They were cooler years. And there was a big problem because before several years ago, you were told that the problem was global warming. But after 1998, for the several years, it didn't get warmer. They had a problem. The alarmists had to do something. So what do? You confuse people. You go to a firm like a PR firm called Maslansky in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and you say, help. We have a problem. We don't have global warming enough to make people worried, scared. It's terrible. And Maslansky came through. And what did they come through with? Climate change. Good. So now when you read the newspapers, what do you hear? You hear climate change. You don't hear global warming. You hear climate change. And what is climate change? It's obscure. It's difficult to understand. It's difficult to prove either way. Climate change. Well, look, January versus July. There's climate change. But what about year to year? Is there climate change? How do you measure it? And this helped the alarmists a great deal because now they no longer had to talk about global warming. They could talk, which is easy. It's either warming or it isn't warming, right? You get yes or no. But if you want climate change, what's that? Okay. Well, we've just gone to some issues where there hasn't been too much climate change. But then you read in the papers, oh my Lord, this year, what a warm year. You've read this, right? This is 2023, the warmest year that ever occurred. We're probably going to boil to death by December. but it's not happening. So look at these spikes toward the bottom. What is that? That's El Nino. So what's El Nino? This is when there are winds in the Pacific. And these winds pick up the top of the waves and the hot air and they bring it all around the earth. And we have a warm year. Well, is this a surprise? No, it's not a surprise. We've known this since 1800. The fishermen off of South America, they noticed that every several years there was a warm year. And what was the warm year? That was El Nino. And this is El Nino. What's going to be this was a warm year. See? And look at the spikes. You see 2016 that we spoke about? There's a spike. And the top where you got those squiggly lines, those squiggly lines, those are that's the actual temperatures. And you can see the warmest temperatures are where you have the biggest spikes, 1998, 2016. And so that's why this is a warm year. It has nothing to do with carbon dioxide. You see that nice blue line rising as the years go through? That's carbon dioxide. There's no connection between the two. But half the country thinks there is a connection. And they're frightened, and they're scared, and there's no reason for you to be either frightened or scared. Heat waves. Well, that's the latest thing. Extreme weather. Oh my Lord. Extreme weather. What does it mean? Well, let's take heat, for example. More heat waves, but there aren't more heat waves. And this is another problem the government has. This is from the EPA. And you see the heat waves were really bad in the 1930s. Remember the Dust Bowls? And there were problems there. Well, you don't remember because you weren't around. But if you were around, you would never remember. Okay. So you see that. But here's the thing about this chart. It disappeared this year. It was a bad chart for the climate alarmists. And the EPA and the government is in total cahoots with the climate alarmists. So you can't find this chart. You have to come to me. See? So close. Okay. So what else do they do? How do they scare you? Well, we have the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement says 200 countries, we're all going to get together and we're going to agree, we're going to stop this global warming, global warming, climate change, we're going to stop it. So they make predictions. Those are the red line, that strong red line, that's the average of 100 predictions by the alarmists at the UN. It's called the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, see? And what do? They're 3 times off. See the blue? The blue is what actually happened. The red is what they tell you will happen. And what do? We act as if we are going to have 3 times the heat increase, which of course it hasn't happened, and it's probably not going to happen. Okay, this is the chart you have to memorize. Forget it. Okay, so it's a very complicated chart. But basically what it says is something you already know, and that is this. 99% of all radiant heat comes from the sun. And nobody's surprised, right? 0.5% comes from carbon dioxide. Now, why should we be afraid of the impact of carbon dioxide on global warming? It just isn't there. There's no justification for it. And you can just thank Professor Shaviv at the university in Israel. Okay. So let's talk about carbon dioxide. It has very minimal effect. And so you can see, of all the greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, CO2, usually gets top billing because it accounts for 80% of total greenhouse gases. 80%. Okay, that's a lot, right? That's this much. But actually, if you look at it, water vapor is 99%. Now this is the most important book ever written on the environment. It's by Al Gore. It's called An Inconvenient Truth. Have you read it? Anyone read this thing? Fortunately, nobody's read it. Okay, good. Well, anyway, this is what Al is telling us, that we should worry. But what Al forgot to mention in his book, when he's talking about greenhouse gases, he forgot to mention water vapor. Really? Well, we should worry about greenhouse gases, which represent nothing, virtually a few percent, and we should ignore water vapor, which of course is 95%. Makes a lot of sense, right? But that's what we get. I'll give Al Gore another chance, don't worry about it. Okay. So what happened? Let's go into years. So what was 2020, right? 2020 was the year of the COVID. What happened? People didn't go to school, they didn't travel to school, they didn't travel to business, they didn't drive, they didn't fly. And guess what? We saved 10% of all carbon dioxide. It's never happened before. There's never been a human experience like 2020 with the COVID. Now, based on that, the climate alarmists will say, well, this is going to be a cool year, right? Because there's less carbon dioxide in the air. Well, no. Actually, this was the second warmest year after 2016. But give them another chance. 2021, what happened? People went back to work. We saw we used a lot of oil and gas and coal, and we went back to normal. And it was a cooler year. But the alarmists will say, well, look, you can't take 1 year. You got to take a longer period of time. All right, so let's go back a longer period of time. Now, 32 years is much longer than 1 year. We all know that. And 32 years was the time between 1944 and 1976. So look at this. Now, you've got these squiggly lines going back and forth, but guess what? It became cooler. We had 32 years of coolness while the carbon dioxide went up every year. What were these carbon dioxide molecules doing? Were they sleeping? They were ignorant? They didn't know what they were supposed to do? No, they just are ineffective. They have very little to do with anything. In 1976, by then, the same people who were telling us we're going to die from global warming were telling us we're going to die from global cooling. But they made a mistake, but they corrected it now. So now we're going to have global warming. Just ask them. Okay. These are trees, right? These are 4 pictures, and what they show is that if you give trees more carbon dioxide, they're going to grow faster. They're going to grow stronger. This is the same thing that happens with crops, corn, oat, wheat. That's what happens. They grow faster. And we now have another 100 million people that have food because of carbon dioxide. With that 100 extra parts per million of carbon dioxide, we now have people who have food. And it's more than that. Because when we breathe, what do we breathe out? We breathe out carbon dioxide. We're generating pollution, right? That's according to the Supreme Court. They've declared carbon dioxide a pollutant, so we are polluting every time we breathe. However, the trees save us. What do? The trees provide us with the opportunity of converting that carbon dioxide by photosynthesis to oxygen. So they generate oxygen, and without the trees, we'd all be dead because we wouldn't have oxygen to live with. So let's thank the trees and let's thank carbon dioxide. Okay. Well, here Al Gore gets another chance, right? So let's talk about the sea rising. Now, Al told us that the sea was going to rise 20 feet in the near future. Well, let's take the near future. 15 years is the near future. It actually rose 2 inches. Okay, so he was wrong, right? Let's agree he was wrong. And he missed by about 100 times. Now, how do you do that, really? Isn't that something that's just a belief rather than a scientific fact? Well, in any case, let's see what's really happening. Now, we're standing right now on what was 100 feet of ice 20,000 years ago. We had an ice age, remember? No, you don't remember, but we had one. Okay, so we have 100 feet of ice here. So clearly, the Earth has warmed up over the past 20,000 years, and the oceans have risen for 20,000 years because that's what happens when you have some heating. So let's look at how much this is. This is New York City, okay? Now, this shows acceleration. So acceleration is the increase in increase. Every year, the seas do rise, but they don't rise on an accelerated basis. They rise on a steady basis, and that's what this shows. So for New York City, it's rising about 3 millimeters a year. That's 1 millimeter every 8 years or so. It's about 1 foot every 100 years. That's what it is. And this is the picture of acceleration, and this is where New York City shows about a 1 foot increase over the past 100 years, or whatever it is there. Okay. This is Los Angeles. Los Angeles increases, the water increases outside the Los Angeles in the Pacific by 1 millimeter a year. This means that Los Angeles will have a 1 foot increase during the next 300 years. So they shouldn't worry too much, right? Nothing to worry about here. And this is the 7 largest cities in the world. So we have Calcutta, Mumbai, Buenos Aires, Tokyo, New York, Los Angeles. Okay, what do you see? It's all straight lines. Every city has had straight line increase in the level of water for many, many years. And there's no exceptions. The UN tells us something quite different. The UN, you see this orange line that's going up? Okay, the UN has told us that the waters have accelerated 3 times since 1900, and they're going to accelerate another 3 times between now and 2050. Really? Well, it may be true, but it hasn't been true, and there's no indication that it will be true. But that doesn't mean that we don't behave as if it were true, because we do. The blue line is what's actually happening. There is no increase. The average increase in the whole world is about 3 millimeters a year, which is very minimal, as I described. So this is what's happening. You want to know why? Why is it that there's a disagreement? And it's because the alarmists use computer models. And these incorporate many uncertain values and even outright guesses, whereas the realists forecast just a continuation of the past. So let's pretend we're realists, and we're just going to say that what's going to happen next year very likely is more dependent on last year than someone else's confused computer. Okay, polar bears. So how many of you think the polar bears are heading toward extinction there? Good. I'll skip the slide then. They actually were going toward extinction. They were going toward extinction up until about 1970 because their fur makes very good rugs. Have you ever seen a polar bear rug? It's beautiful. But you can't do it anymore because they outlawed killing polar bears there. So you can't kill a polar bear now. And as a result, we have 3 times more polar bears than we had when they stopped shooting them. We have about 30,000 in the wild as opposed to 10,000. Well, so the polar bears are not worried. But who's worried about it? The alarmists are worried. And why are they worried? They need money. How do you get money? Polar bears are cute. Here, you send money to me, I help the polar bears. The fact that the polar bears don't need any help is irrelevant. I need the money. Okay. Now, another claim is the coral reefs. What's happening with the coral reefs? Well, we're told they're going to bleach. They're going to all turn white or whitish yellow. And this is because the waters are rising in temperature, and it's terrible. And also the pH is decreasing. It's becoming acidic. Of course, it's not acidic. It's basic, but they just pretend it's becoming acidic to make you worried a little bit more. And it works. So this is a picture of Palau. And the reason why I showed Palau is because Palau is just north of Australia. It's almost in the equator. It's a group of islands, and they have this beautiful coral reefs. But 20 years ago, they didn't. They had real problems. The coral reef was all bleaching. Well, guess what? If you stop throwing refuse into the ocean and you eliminate the type of suntan lotion that people are wearing, this is what happens. And that's what they did. It's that simple. Okay. Al Gore, he gets one more chance. From his book, here are 16 animals that he claimed would become extinct, right? Well, his record wasn't good. Nothing happened. But let's just go into a couple of them, because it's kind of interesting. Okay, this is the Hawaiian tree frog. The Hawaiian tree frog, right now, how's it doing? Well, they're about 20,000 per acre in Hawaii, and if Al Gore wants to know how they're doing, he should call 843 organ pest, and he'll find out there. Now, he has another chance. Here's the golden toad. Now, here he was right. The golden toad became extinct. It didn't become extinct, but Al Gore's timing was bad, because the golden toad went extinct 20 years earlier, before he wrote his book. Yeah, and it died from a virus, so don't worry about it. Golden frog is gone, but there's nothing we can do about it. Okay. How about predictions? We have the Paris Agreement. And by the way, most of government regulations are based upon the Paris Agreement. This agreement by 200 countries that we're going to cut down on our fossil fuels. And what are they going to tell us? They tell us this, that lifespan is going to decrease, poverty is going to increase, literacy is going to decrease, and wealth is going to decrease. This is what they tell us is going to happen. Okay, but let's look at history, the last 100 years. What's actually happened? So lifespan. Look, lifespan is longer, right? That's what's happened while the Earth is warmed by 1 degree. How about poverty? Well, there's less poverty now. How about literacy? There's much less literacy now. And what about wealth? Well, wealth has increased 70 times since 1900. Really? So it looks like, they were wrong on everything. This is what's happened, right? Lifespans increase, poverty's decreased, literacy's increased, wealth is increased. And based on history, the Paris Agreement is totally wrong about the future. There's no justification for the claims that we're going to have a disaster or a catastrophe, just none at all. Okay, so what do they want us to do? Spend money. Money's going to do it, right? Now, we currently have $33 trillion of debt, right? We're already insolvent. But we can prove that we can become totally bankrupt by going through the Green New Deal. That has $7 trillion for things like automobiles that we should be driving, wind energy, solar energy, that sort of stuff. But then they've added on another 30 trillion just so that everybody has a job and doesn't have to work, and a few other things. So now we have 70 trillion. This is a sure bankruptcy, which means superinflation and nothing is worth anything, and we have anarchy. So when you hear the Green New Deal, just think of anarchy. Okay. So let's say we do a job. You know, the United States is about the only country which has actually reduced its footprint, its carbon footprint. But they want us to reduce it more, right? Isn't it what they want? Sure. So here's China. What's China going to do? China's going to build 1 new coal plant every week. Now, we can't do anything about that. There's no way anywhere that we're going to be able to reduce the total carbon footprint of the Earth if China intends to have a coal plant every week. And we've all agreed that since China is a basket case and needs all the help in the world, that they're allowed to do whatever they want, but only till 2040. See, then they have to behave themselves. Okay. So here's the Paris Agreement. What's it telling us? It's telling us that there's going to be a disaster if we have 1 degree centigrade increase. Let's look at history and look at what's really happening. Okay. So you probably guessed the Paris Agreement was signed in Paris, right? That's what called Paris Agreement. Well, in Paris, in July, which is a warm month, the average temperature is 70 degrees. So where's the warmest month? That's in Burkina Faso. That's in Central Africa. And there, the average temperature in July is 85 degrees, right? 15 degrees warmer. Now what they're telling us in the Paris Agreement is that if Paris becomes 2 degrees Fahrenheit warmer or 1 degree centigrade warmer, we're going to have a disaster and a catastrophe. That would mean that Paris would have to go all the way from 70 degrees Fahrenheit to 72 degrees Fahrenheit. So think of today. Think of the disaster we would have if today it was 72 degrees Fahrenheit outside. 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, we had the warm period. This was the global warm period. They had 100, 200 years of warmth, and Paris was much more than 2 degrees Fahrenheit warm, and we don't have any reports of bad stuff happening. Okay. So the question is, why do they do this? What's the advantage to anybody of this? What really is just a false scientific information. But there's a reason for it. A couple of reasons. One is money. There's a lot of money in this. You know, the Deficit Reduction Act that we passed last year is going to cost you guys $1.2 trillion. It's a lot of money. And where's it going? It's not going to poor people. It's helping rich people become richer. That's what's happening. You have Tesla, okay? A Tesla costs average $60,000. How many poor people have bought a Tesla? Really? That's what we're up against. And the same thing works for with utilities. Utilities are the ones that are generating the solar panels and the wind energy. And so the utility owners are the ones that benefit from that. These are not poor people. Well, what about power? This is the single largest grab of power that has ever occurred. And you are the victims. Because if I control the carbon dioxide molecule, which is what I'm saying, because I want to control control the carbon dioxide molecule, I can tell you what you're going to drive. I can tell you what appliance you're going to buy. And if it costs more, that's too bad. It's all for a good cause, right? I can tell you what you're going to eat. In fact, that's what these yo-yos in Dubai are doing right now. They're coming back to tell you don't eat meat because they know better than you. They're smarter than you. They're the elite, and you're just peons. We're all peons here. That's what's happening. So that's why they're doing this, because governments like to control people. They don't like people to have a lot of freedom because they know better. Besides, they become richer. Let's go over how they do it. First, we're going to talk about wind farms, okay? So wind farms save a lot of energy, right? Except a typical wind farm uses 80,000 tons of materials. Talking about concrete, plastics, iron ore. That's a lot. It means that for the first several years, these wind farms don't save any energy whatsoever. They have to work off this 80,000 tons. And then how about for the environment? How are they for the environment? What do you think? Well, they're killing hundreds of thousands of birds and bats. Wind farms just slice off their wings, so they die because they can't fly. Solar panels are much more careful about how they kill the birds. They burn them, and they incinerate immediately. And together, between the wind farms and the solar panels, we're killing over 1 million birds and bats every year. We don't know exactly how many, because they're not counting exactly there. And as far as waste, they're going to generate more waste than we have from plastic, twice as much waste as we could ever get from plastic, because the only way to eliminate the solar panels is to put them into blocks where they're going to stay for, hopefully, forever. And then we get the Teslas here. Well, how much energy has a Tesla actually saved us? To make a Tesla requires 500,000 pounds of earth to be moved and mined. That's how you get your lithium. You need a lot of lithium, right? Who ever heard of lithium before 20 years ago? It was one of those elements you didn't have to study, right? Okay, but now you have to study because it's important. You gotta know where it is. Okay. So right now, a car has to go for about 8 years before it breaks even on energy. The average car is less than 4 years old. It's electric, which means we've spent more energy making the car to date. We have more carbon dioxide in the air because of making electric cars than we had before, or that we would have if we ever used something reasonable like a hybrid car, which makes much more sense. Hybrid cars require 1/30th the amount of lithium as a Tesla does. And we spend $500 billion. So what do you get? For $500 billion, we now have more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere than we would have if we never did this. Okay, so how do they do it? This is a list of how they do it. I'm just going to go through a few of them because otherwise the test would be very difficult. So there's censorship, manipulating data, controlling funding, language distortion, made-up facts and lies, hiding reality, fear, intimidation, and guilt. This is their strategy. And don't knock it because it works. It's very effective. Let's just take a couple of these. Okay. Censorship. You don't have this here, of course, but for most liberal, virtually all liberal universities, anything I've told you is not taught. Not only isn't it taught, it's not permitted to be spoken about because it's settled science that the alarmists are right. That's how it is, guys. It's settled science. And what about the government? Well, the government can't spend $1 trillion on climate change if there's a problem. So there is no problem from their perspective that we can eliminate by our working here. And the media, the New York Times and the Washington Post, will only tell you one side, the other side. So you have three major areas of censorship: schools, government, and the media. So how do we manipulate data? If you look right, if you look on your right, you can see it kind of looks, where there's an A, that there's a little more death. These are deaths from heat or deaths from cold. Of course, the blue is cold, and you can see that there are a few more deaths from cold than there are from heat. But that scale is 5 times smaller than the scale for heat. Now, if you look on the left, you'll see that this is what's really happening. There are many more deaths from cold than from heat. To show it better, this is clearer, right? You see the blue, you can hardly see the red. What it means is that if it actually did get warmer, we'd have fewer people dying from extreme temperatures. That's what the chart means, that's reality, but not too many people know this. It's kind of like a secret, right? And the government. Let's say you're at a university and you want some money from the government. There's $3 billion available for climate change, but there's not a penny that's going to come for anything that I've told you about. You take the position that we really don't have a problem and you're going to prove it, you're not going to get any money because there's a monopoly. It gives out this money and it's all on the other side. Weather and climate. Okay. So how many times have you heard that Hurricane Janet is the worst hurricane we've ever had, and that's a proof of climate change, right? But of course, any hurricane is only an example of weather. It has nothing to do with climate, or very little to do. Climate's what happens over many years there. And so when you read in the paper that we just had didn't matter whether it's a tornado, a forest fire, hurricane, it's all the same. It's only a weather event. I've talked to you about the climate. The climate hasn't changed dramatically, except January is still cooler than July. That's the same. And here's my favorite. You've heard of this? Greta Thunberg. What is she? A genius. She's got 2 million people following her. Around the year 2030, we will set off an irreversible chain reaction beyond our control that will most likely lead to catastrophe. Our lives are in your hands. How dare you to continue to look away from global warming and come here saying that you are doing enough. Your generation is failing us, and if you choose to fail us, I say we'll never forgive you. Okay. And what type of logic is this? Right? This is the same logic as a 4-year-old saying, Mom, if I don't get ice cream today, I am never going to talk to you. Right? That's what this is. Total nonsense. But she's a very effective speaker, and we can't discount the effectiveness of the false information that she is providing. So what happens with this net zero? All the net zero does is provide inequality. It makes rich people richer and poor people poorer, right? We talked about the Tesla and electric vehicles. Utility owners are the same, right? Who owns the utilities? Shareholders, they're getting the benefits of the wind energy and solar energy investments. And of course, the worst is the poorest countries in the world. We've told Africa, don't use fossil fuels. And they use 1/10 of what we have. They don't have lights at night, half of them. And we're telling them they can't use it. They should be using renewable energies. And we force them to do that to some extent. Okay, but what is a solution? A solution really is very simple. If we want, it is good to use less fossil fuels, but it has nothing to do with why they tell us. It's not because fossil fuels are bad, it's because fossil fuels are good. And we don't have enough. We're going to be out of fossil fuels in 100 to 200 years. It's important for us to conserve fossil fuels, but not for the reasons that they're telling us. The reason is you save money. I mean, every company wants to save money. They want to use fewer fossil fuels. This is an example that I'm working with. These are liquid-cooled computers. They'll save 50% of all the energy that's used by data centers. But it's just one of thousands of examples now, because everybody wants to save energy and use less fossil fuels. Okay, so here's the conclusion, right? There's no reason to pursue net zero, which is only going to make us poor in our attempt to fix environmental problems that don't exist. There's no global warming problem, there's no climate change problem, and we should concentrate on the realization of worthy goals and happiness. We are blessed with a wonderful climate, thank God. That's it, guys. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Einhorn. Don't forget that you can come up and ask him questions. He does have some copies of his book available. You are dismissed.
Well, or I'd be happy to answer some questions now if you like. Is there time?
We are right up against our time. Why don't we just have them come up?
I talk too loud, too long. Okay, thank you.